Welcome to Confessions by Banana Ketchup. I think something is following me. This whole thing started about 10 years ago in 2010. I was in the Navy at the time and stationed in Connecticut. The naval base I was stationed at had been built during World War II as a submarine base to combat German U-boats. In the 50s, it was retrofitted with Cold War-era bomb bunkers and underground tunnels that had been sealed off in the 90s after decades of disuse and maintenance neglect. Of course, there were always the horror stories of that one seaman who stupidly wandered into the tunnels and got lost, never to be heard from again. Cue the X-Files theme. But these were just campfire stories. However, on this particular base was a building named for Admiral English. This building was reputed to be majorly haunted. The night watchman would see people in the building after it had been closed for the night, and when they tried to pursue those people, the watchman would turn a corner to a dead end and find no one there. When the rowing watch would check doors to secure areas that were meant to be locked, only to find them unlocked. They'd call down their superiors to file the report on the door only for it to be locked. You'd be in the middle of your rowing patrol and all the lights in the building would turn off, and on one specific occasion the stationary watchman at the door went a little wonky. He logged the long-dead Admiral English as being in the building in the official logbook. He then turned to the painting of Admiral English that was hung on the quarterdeck and gouged the eyes of the painting out. He later claimed he did this because the painting wouldn't stop watching and whispering at him. He also logged in and out of the building various famous figures like Santa, Elvis, Vincent Price, and the Beatles. After testifying at Captain's Mast that the painting was trying to talk to him, he was sent to mental health and deemed unfit to serve in the military, given a Section 8 and sent home. I stood the night watch in that building a short while after the painting has been removed for repairs. Me and my watchmate heard people moving around the building a number of times, but any time I went to investigate, there was no one. I was supposed to be continuously rowing, and every time I came to the stairwell, I'd have to turn the lights back on. At one point, the elevator in the building started itself for seemingly no reason. Fortunately, I didn't see anything. At least that night I didn't. A couple weeks later, I was walking up an outdoor staircase on the base that connected the lower base to the upper base. This particular staircase was very long, think Mayan pyramid long. There were no turn-offs for the staircase once you were on it. Then you were on it until you reached the top or the bottom. On one side of the staircase was an empty field of grass that sloped down a well you could see from the top to the bottom off, and on the other was a 3 to 4 foot partitioning wall with a 2 foot tall double railing on top of it, and beyond this partition was evergreen bushes growing so close together they basically formed an impenetrable hedge. So there was nowhere to go that way, and you could easily be seen going to the other. I was walking with a friend toward the galley up the stairs, and in front of us, a short ways up the stairs, was either a chief or an officer. We weren't really sure as we were seeing them from behind, and they wear a similar khaki uniform. Except the particular person's uniform was odd. It looked old. Not worn out old, but more likely the way uniforms looked back in World War II days. I turned to my friend to comment on this and glanced at me and agreed, asking if maybe he was headed to some event that required an older uniform. We glanced back toward him and he was just gone. From the halfway point up the staircase, he'd vanished. The only place he could have been hiding was in the bushes, but we had seen him climbing the dividing wall if he had, I'm sure of it, and why would he do so in the first place? That was the first time I saw something. Over the coming weeks, I began to notice weird little things. Things that could be put down to an absent-mindedness at first. Like, I'd find my keys moved from my desk to a shelf where I kept movies and have no recollection of putting them there. Then other things would happen. I'd be watching a movie when suddenly my TV would turn off. I assumed there was a timer I accidentally managed to turn on, but I couldn't find anything in the menu or manual about that. At one point, I headed to the vending machine in the lobby for a late night snack, leaving my door ajar, only to come back and find my door locked with the key card inside my barracks room. I assumed I messed up and accidentally pulled the door shut instead of leaving it open, so I accepted the lecture I got from my superior for locking myself out, only for him to discover the door was ajar, so he gave me a random inspection instead. At another point, the key card to my door stopped reading. I went to get it recharged and they found that it'd been completely wiped of all data and they had to issue me a new one, along with a warning to keep it away from magnets. I didn't have any magnets. A wristwatch I'd gotten for my birthday disappeared for 3 days, and then one day I opened my wardrobe and there it was, front and center directly in my line of sight. On top of all that general weirdness, I felt like I kept seeing things out of the corner of my eye, but when I looked, there would be nothing there. At the time, I just assumed I was stressed and imagining things and that I needed a vacation. Luckily, I was on my way out of the Navy. I moved back home to the old farmhouse that my great-grandfather had built. The first night I was there, I went to bed at my usual time of around 11 p.m., only to jolt awake from a deep sleep at around 2 a.m. and suddenly be wide awake and not able to get back to sleep until near 5. This quickly became a regular occurrence, unfortunately. So much so that I started to play video games and surf the web for a couple hours whenever I'd suddenly wake up at 2 a.m. And then this weird recurring dream started. In the dream, I'm living in some old Victorian-style plantation home with a wife and 2 kids. I'm walking through the back gate where I see my kids playing in the backyard. I walk into the back door into the plantation-style kitchen that's been modernized. I walk into the laundry pantry room of the kitchen and look out of the back window at my kids only to see a 3rd kid. A girl in turn-of-the-century dress walking toward the kitchen door. And as I watch, she disappears. I go to find my wife, who seemed to be upstairs somewhere. I call up the stairs at her but get no response. I turn back towards the kitchen and there, less than 2 inches from my face, is the face of the ghost girl. I startle and scream, backing away from her, until I find myself cornered on an old table and the wall. The girl stares at me as she approaches, getting right in my face. I try to look away in shame as this overwhelming sense of guilt washes over me. Then she opens her mouth to speak, and as I look toward her to hear what she has to say, I wake up. Every time. I have had this dream many times in the preceding years, and I've never actually heard what she has to say. So I'm having this weird dream and I'm waking up in the dead of night, and I mean from a sleep so deep the dead would be jealous to not even groggy awake in an instant. And I'm still experiencing the shadows. As well, I've started experiencing this weird thing where I'll be playing video games and I'll feel this human presence behind me watching, and occasionally I swear I could hear breathing, but then when I turn to look, nothing. I assumed I was just having some sort of emotional trouble acclimating to civilian life again, but that's when I started to find bruises and scratches I don't know how I got. I'd wake up and there's be a massive bruise on my forearm that wasn't there when I went to sleep, and little things were going missing. My tools were disappearing. I somehow went through 4 pairs of sunglasses in less than a month. My expensive canvas paint brushes started to vanish, and I had to replace my house keys twice in that same month. I went to a doctor, told him I was having bouts of sleeplessness, kept losing things, nightmares, and waking up covered in bruises and scratches. He told me I was developing maintenance insomnia, likely due to stress of not being in the military anymore, and suggested I turn my alarm clock away from me and walk more. These things help, but not much, and he couldn't explain the random injuries, so not a lot of help. Then one night, I just couldn't seem to stay awake, so I hit the rack at like 9 at night. Woke up at 1 a.m. to the smell of smoke. I opened the door to my bedroom, only to be met with a wall of smoke and an orange haze. I quickly covered my mouth and started finding my way out of the house. I made my way to the nearest exit, and when I turned around, I could see the entire front room of the house was completely engulfed in flames. The fire inspector came out and couldn't find any natural means of the fire starting, and so suspected arson, but they also couldn't find an artificial ignition point either. It just seemed to have happened, started from nothing and just happened from nothing. There was also a bunch of weird stuff about the fire. The fire burned so hot it melted the fireproof safe, but then my art portfolio was untouched. My TV and Xbox were melted beyond recognition, but the Bible my father gave me for my 18th birthday was fine. It was truly bizarre. After that, I moved into town with my parents. They were living in this little house, and it was weird because the house was full of windows and well lit, but somehow still seemed full of shadows. Something my mother noticed. We sat down one day and discussed how we both kept seeing shadows moving in our peripheral vision. She told me that since I moved in, she kept finding her wedding ring in weird places. She would leave it on her bedside table, only to find it in the dining room, for example. There were other weird things too, like my folks would leave for the night and I'd be in my room on my computer and start hearing doors slamming closed, only to investigate the noise and find nothing but open doors. Even the doors that were usually closed, such as my parents' door or the door to the laundry room. These events kept happening and getting worse. At one point, I was chatting with a Navy friend, only to hear all this banging and absolute ruckus from the kitchen. Thinking my parents' dog was into something, I went to clean up his mess, only to find that he was covering behind my dad's armchair and every pot and pan in the house too scattered across the kitchen floor. In another instance, my folks were out and my brother came over to watch Monday Night Football. We were sitting there talking about how the Lions were never gonna make it to the Super Bowl if Stafford didn't learn to perform under pressure. I had the dog sleeping on the couch next to me, and my brother was in my dad's chair. He got up to get a beer from the fridge and made it around his side of the couch when we heard a huge bang, like a bomb going off, from upstairs. We went rushing up there, only to discover what few personal items I had left after the fire had been thrown around the room. Google had been pulled up on my laptop, and a bunch of random characters had been typed into the search bar. And my mattress and bedding looked like it had been chucked across the room in a fit of rage. And this is when I started to think it could actually be a haunting. There were other witnesses now, and there's no way I forgot that I ransacked my own bedroom. I wasn't imagining things or hearing things. This was happening somehow. A couple days later, I fell asleep reading up on ghosts, hauntings, and common occurrences that happen during a haunting. I awoke in the middle of the night and turned toward my bedside table to turn off the light, only to see an older woman in a high-collar black Victorian-era dress standing at the foot of my bed. I stared at her for a moment and could only think to ask, "Who are you?" She just shushed me in response. At that point, I was overwhelmed by a sense of well-being and contentedness, like being wrapped in a warm hug, and I got the impression I should just go back to sleep. So I lied back down, noticed that the old lady seemed to be floating as it didn't look like she had any legs, and started to fall back to sleep. All of a sudden, the reality on what I was seeing hit me, and I bolted up in bed and the room was empty. To this day, I don't know if that was real, a dream or what, but I can tell you this, I didn't sleep a wink more that night, and I started to question my own sanity. Shortly after, my parents asked if I could stay living with them as they found it useful to have me around, doing some of the chores they were simply getting too old to do, such as shoveling snow from the walkway. I agreed, and so it was decided we needed a bigger space to live. Things settled down significantly at the new house, though I was still having the insomnia, the dream about the ghost girl, waking up with minor injuries out of nowhere that at this point became so commonplace I started wearing hoodies everywhere to hide them, and there was one new thing. The furnace in the new house kept breaking down. We'd call in a repair guy who'd shut it down, look at it, find nothing wrong with it, and start it back up just to find it works perfectly. So that was odd. Unfortunately, the landlord mortgaged the house and wasn't paying the monthly installments, so it was foreclosed on. We moved to another house where the insomnia finally stopped, and while I still had the dream, I had it less, and the injuries lessened as well. There were a few instances where weird noises would be heard or the dog would bark at nothing in the hallway. The worst thing that happened there was every now and then I'd get a stomach cramp. It lasted between 20 minutes to an hour at the most. This was weird because I hadn't changed my exercise routine at all, or my dietary habits, or any brands that I'd normally eat. And then one day, it was my day off of work, and my girlfriend at the time was working. I was all caught up on my chores and had nothing to do, so I was playing God of War, Ascension, the Trial of Archimedes. And I started to get another stomach cramp, except this one didn't go away like all the others. In fact, it lasted about a week. I finally broke down and went to the doctors, and they couldn't find a reason for it at all. I went home, struggled to fall asleep, and when I woke up, the pain was gone. The owner of the house we were living in at that point decided to retire from being a landlord and sell, so my parents again moved, this time to a much smaller house where we noticed a lot more weird stuff. We kept finding doors open. We'd wake up in the morning to find the TV on. This one actually did have a timer in it, so even if we did forget to turn it off, it would turn itself off after about 4 hours. And we were still finding it on in the morning. The chairs around the dining room table we never actually used always seemed to be pulled out, and the light in the kitchen was always turning itself off when you were cooking, and you always seemed to have the feeling of being watched. Luckily, we didn't live there long. As long with the supernatural weirdness, we also lived in a bad neighborhood, and the constant flashing lights convinced my parents to just buy a house. At this point in 2017, I visited Europe for 3 months with my at this point fiancé, and nothing happened. No dreams, no bruises and scratches, no anything for those entire 3 months. It was awesome. While I was in Europe, my folks moved into their new house, and when I got back, I went to the new house. Nothing happened the entire time I was in that house, thankfully, and I began to hope that whatever had been plaguing me for all those years had finally got left behind somehow. My fiancé and I got married later that same year, and we decided to live in Europe, where my now wife owned an apartment that she had inherited from her recently deceased mother. We figured with no mortgage or rent payments, it'd be a nice head start, and that's when things started up again. I'll be sitting in the living room and I'll see a shadow walk by the door to the room. At one point, the only ones home were me and our toddler. My wife was at the gym, my toddler was napping, and I was on Reddit when I saw the shadow walk across the door. I immediately thought, who is in the apartment? And I got up to investigate, only to find no one. My wedding ring disappeared off my desk while I was in the shower one day. I never found it, and it never turned back up. I had to get a new one. Various rooms in the apartment constantly feel frigid, even in the height of summer, and those pesky doors kept slamming themselves closed, even if they weren't open to begin with. And to top it all off, I found myself discovering weird scratches I can't explain on my legs again. I've started having the dream about the ghost girl again, and to top it all off, recently I began having this weird thing where I can't seem to wake up. I'll go to bed at 10:30 at night and not be able to wake up until almost noon the next day. I sleep through my alarm, my wife's alarm, my toddler's fussing through the baby monitor, and really anything, which has never been a problem before. At this point, I'm convinced that I somehow attracted something into my life that's been following me around for a decade. Something that took the guise of an old-timey sailor, the turn-of-the-century ghost girl, and the Victorian matriarch to prevent me from seeing its true self. A thought that horrifies me. If there is anybody out there who knows more about hauntings than I do, let me know what you think it is, how I could get rid of it, and what I should do to protect my loved ones. Thank you Thor's Hammer 0999, the author. Thank you for watching everyone. If you already haven't, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any new episodes. See you again soon, and until then please, be safe.